Georgina and Helen, who are the real experts in the room on this subject.
Thank you, Kevin. So, welcome everybody. Just so that we've got an idea of who's in the room, if you're here as a person who is interested in helping the NHS improve services, can you just stick your hand up if you're involved with a PPG, that kind of thing. If you're a clinician, yeah, a couple of clinicians, fantastic. And if you're working in a more of a management role, maybe a practice manager or CCG or that kind of thing. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So that just gives Helen and I a chance to understand who's in the room. So we've got time with you until 1:30, and by 1:30 we're going to have understood what group consultations are and what they're not, and most importantly you'll have the chance today to actually experience the process, okay? So because we're going to learn about group consultations by running a group consultation about group consultations. So this is a really great way of actually giving you a chance to see how the process works and to understand that actually often when we want to learn about something, whatever it is, about group consultations, about diabetes or asthma or whatever, there's often a lot of repetition. Often people have the same questions that they want to ask, and actually you learn a lot by actually hearing the questions that other people ask, because you go, oh, I hadn't thought of asking that question. So we found this works really, really well. We're also going to watch a video of patient experiences. Some of you will have already watched a video, hopefully, in your pre-work. We're going to watch a different video, just to also, for those of you who did watch it, so that you notice that it doesn't seem to matter what healthcare condition you have. Group consultations seems to give people the same things, which is really interesting. What's always a really great thing to do at this stage in the conversation around moving group consultations forward is to get you to think about how things will be better and different if we had group consultations in Hertfordshire. So we're going to spend a little bit of time doing something called a shared ambition, so looking at it through the eyes of patients, through the eyes of primary care teams, and also through the eyes of the whole system. How that's going to flow is that we're doing our welcome and setup right now. Then we'll spend a little bit of time just reviewing what group consultations are. We'll watch a film of patients' experience. We'll do our group consultation about group consultations. And just before that, Helen, who's my expert in the room, who's helped to roll out group consultations in early years in Hertfordshire. So Hertfordshire already is actually leading the way with group consultations in terms of the health visiting service. So she'll share her experiences of doing that, and also she'll be our expert in our group consultation. We'll do the shared ambition and then we'll ask you for some feedback. So that session flow is on the wall there. If at any time you want to check in of where we are and what's coming up, it's on the wall. We're also going to work with a set of understandings today so that we all get the best out of today. So I'd really like you to be in the room. I know that you're really busy, you've got lots of different stuff going on. For the time that we're together, let's kind of be really respectful of each other and be physically in the room. If you need to take a phone call or something, then just pop outside and do it. Otherwise, we'll be here and present to learn. We're going to stay curious, so some of you might be kind of feeling maybe a little bit agnostic about group consultations, thinking, this seems like a kind of a way in which we're kind of somehow compromising, confidentiality or that kind of thing. So just stay really open to learning and exploring some of those ideas that you might have in your head already. We're going to listen to everybody, to each other. We're going to choose a growth mindset. For those of you who've got young children, you might know, talking about the growth mindset all the time in schools these days. So basically it's like, even if you already do stuff around this, you can always be better. So again, some of you might have experience of doing education in groups and peer get that one way or another. And thinking innovation, because we're still quite early in the process of developing group consultations, even within the UK. And there's always room for new thinking, you know, so how does this fit with social prescribing, for instance? How can we make these two things work really well together? Might be an area for innovation. Is there anything else that we want to add to that list, or is everybody happy with that? Yeah, so we're all holding each other to account for working this way. The third thing that I just want you to introduce you to is the car park. So the car park is what we're going to use if something comes up today that we can't answer in the room, or maybe you're the sort of person who doesn't really like asking questions in a big group. Some people prefer not to. Then you can put your question on the car park, which is just up there, and we will deal with it. We'll make sure that we look at it and give you an answer to that question. If you want it answered and you want everybody to know that you asked it, you can put your name on it. If not, you can just put it up and we'll answer it, you know, for the whole group. Okay, so how I just set up today is in effect how you set up a group consultation. You agree a set of understandings with the patients. These are the group understandings for a group consultation up here. And you have a session flow, which doesn't have any timings on it. And you also use your car park. And this is how you make sure that everybody in the group has the same say, yeah? That we manage the group dynamics really positively. When we do our training, we go into loads of detail about this, but it's just important for you to recognise that how we're running things today is mirroring all the time the way that we work with group consultations. Okay, fine. So, we do like a bit of evaluation. So what I'd like you to do now is to write down on a post-it note. You should have all post-it notes on your chairs. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is I know absolutely everything there is to know about group consultations, and 1 is I don't know anything at all, where do you think you are right now? Okay, Helen's going to come and collect those in. If we could pop them down to the end of the row. Do you need a pen? No?
I just wanted to ask if you're going to circulate notes.
We'll circulate the slides, and there was some stuff that was sent out beforehand with case studies, and we'll circulate that again as well. Just make sure we've got your email address, okay?
No, just the score between 1 and 10.
So we're just going to collect in those scores. Lovely, thank you. Helen, there you go. If you can help and pass them down to the end of the row, that would be great.
Sorry?
Yeah, there's masses of pens in there. Cool, okay. So for those of you who are aware of something called the GP Forward View, do you remember? You've probably heard about that. It's a sort of policy document that came out a couple of years ago. Group consultations is actually mentioned as one of the high impact changes that could really help improve the NHS primary care in the GP Forward View. So to a certain degree, that's why we're here today actually, because it's in the GP Forward View. It got into the GP Forward View because there was a CCG in Slough, or Slough CCG. We work with Slough CCG to pilot group consultations as part of something called the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund, which you might remember, I think actually Hearts Valley was one of the sites for that as well, wasn't it? And the patients in Slough asked the GPs to introduce group consultations because they wanted to have more contact with people who live with the same condition. They wanted to spend more time with their doctors and nurses because they didn't feel they got to talk about the things that mattered to them. And they also wanted to get really practical advice about how to manage their condition, which they often didn't really feel they got from healthcare professionals, whereas actually they often got, you know, really valuable advice from other people who were living with the same condition. So really it's thanks to the patients in Slough that we are here today talking about group consultations. And for those of you who know anything about Slough, they speak 137 languages in Slough, and it is quite a deprived area. So in some ways it mirrors some of the parts of your area that, you know, parts of Watford and stuff that where we've got a really broad mix of people and quite a lot of deprivation. So this is pictures of group consultations happening in primary care. So you can see, you know, it's a very different looking kind of consultation to a one-to-one. There are three key roles in a group consultation. The first one is the clinician who's going to be consulting with the patient. The clinician's role is to be there as a clinical expert. But what's a bit different about group consultations is that the way that the clinician works is generally to involve the group in answering each other's questions, and it's only if they can't actually answer the question that the clinician actually tops up. Yeah, so it's more, if we were doing diabetes and my question was, what's HbA1c? The clinician would probably go, does anyone know? Yeah, and then one of the patients might have the right answer, in which case the clinician could say, that's absolutely right, did everybody get that? And often what happens is that patients actually understand better, because often somebody who can use non-medical language is better at explaining things than doctors and nurses. And the doctors and nurses we work with tell us, I learn loads from listening to my patients in my group consultations. I often change the way I explain things and use the explanations that they use after I've heard them. However, the clinician will also come to that group consultation with an agenda of things that he or she wants to talk to each of the individuals about. So they know in advance who's going to be there. And so, for instance, if you need a blood test doing, or you need a flu jab, or, you know, they're recognising from your results that they might want to change your medication or something like that, they have the opportunity to do that, and they do that in the group. Yeah. If, for instance, medication is being changed, the beauty is that the clinician can say, I'm thinking of changing your medication to this. Is there anyone in the group who takes that medication right now? And if there is, that person can share their experiences of taking the medication, and through that the person can make a more informed decision about whether or not they actually want to take that medicine. So proper clinical work is getting done in our group consultations. It's not instead of, it is instead of having a one-to-one. So you don't need to have a one-to-one as well as a group. Although, obviously, if you want to speak to the doctor about something that's private, you can take them aside and talk to them in a private place. Or, if necessary, if there's a problem that if your condition is, you're really having issues, then obviously you would have a follow-up one-to-one with them potentially, just as you would normally if you were having a review. So in many ways it's not different. Then we've got our facilitator, who is a non-clinical person usually. In general practice, healthcare assistants make great facilitators, because often they're the ones who are doing blood tests and taking blood pressure and that kind of thing. But they could also be, for instance, social prescribing workers could act as facilitators, and so can clinicians who are in training. So if you've got new GP registrars, for instance, or if you've got new nurses who are coming back into general practice, or other new people, physicians associates who are coming to work in general practice and maybe have very little experience about consulting with patients, they also make really good facilitators, because they learn so much from watching the doctor or the nurse consulting with patients. So then we have a lot of, as you can imagine, changing the way that we work. So fundamentally, there's quite a lot of admin to start off with. So, overriding your default so that people don't get invited every 10 an appointment is a very simple change which some people have forgotten to make in the past. So when they did their first group consultation, the patients all turned up 10 minutes at a time through the group consultation. So really simple things like that. There's some really practical, you know, kind of things that need to be thought about in order to make this work. So that's why we were really keen for practice managers to be here, because they are really key. In fact, if your practice manager isn't on board, to be honest, you know, group consultations probably won't work in your practice. Okay, so let's watch a little video. If you've got questions coming to your mind, write them on a post-it note, because in a minute, in the group consultation, about group consultations, that's when we're going to answer all of your questions, okay? So as you're watching the film, listening to what I'm saying, make a note of those questions. So, we're going to watch a little film now to get us in the mindset of our patients before we hear from our expert who's from the clinician side. Oh.
I wasn't too sure at first, but I attended one, gave it a go, and I've been absolutely hooked ever since.
So it isn't just a rheumatoid clinic, it's anything to do with pain as well. And you sit and you're taught, and that's why I like coming to this group. So you learn something every time you come.
I find the group clinics very beneficial. A lot of things I've found because various people bring up a subject and you think, oh, I've got that, but I haven't thought of mentioning it. You know, I just thought that's me. But as it is, it's part of the illness. And it's great when you are in a group clinic like that, because somebody will bring up what you think is a minor thing. With the group sessions, you get properly examined, you get all the treatment you need the same day, but you also get the benefit of a lot more information about the drugs, the treatments, your condition.
Main thing is first name. Now that is a big difference. When the doctor sort of takes the time to look up and say, oh, hello, Colin, instead of Mr. George, Mr. Brown, and away you go. And this friendship go on. And it's a pleasure to come.
I think it's good because you're still getting to see your specialist and getting your one-to-one, as well as also going into your group and getting little bits of snippets of information which helps you. So internally I'm thinking, well, I'm coping with this because I know what I'm doing. And there's a lot of things that maybe it's on a one-to-one, I wouldn't think to ask him. And then you also get all the benefit of the questions being answered that people have asked, and the inspiration of other people in the group who are so amazing how they cope with really being a lot of them much worse than I am.
Have you seen this? Suicide. 3 attempts. Loneliness, aches, pains, can't do this. All this just took away. And that's what it did to me. When you sit and think what you've just been through and you kick yourself off the backside. Because you're sharing what you're thinking about. Because everybody then starts laughing. And then you start crying to each other. And then next thing you know, you talk to somebody on that side of the room. And then everybody starts joining in, putting their experiences in.
Everybody is so positive and so determined to make the most of the life that they've got with arthritis, and I would encourage anybody to come and be inspired by other people.
So it's just really powerful, isn't it, to hear people talking about how group consultations impacts. You know, we know that when you live with a long-term condition, particularly long-term conditions that have a big impact on your life, on your mobility, on your kind of ability to get out and about, you know, it's very, very easy to become very locked in, so to speak, in your own thoughts. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could actually give people this kind of inspiration by the way we deliver our planned care? Yeah? So the other bit of this, which is really important given where we are right now in the NHS, is that it is also massively more efficient. So that clinic that I just described to you, this is a rheumatologist who runs his outpatient clinic as a group clinic, and he manages his whole follow-up and new patient caseload in 2 mornings a month, which is amazing. In general practice, where people have scaled up group consultations, in one practice where they're managing all their diabetes through group consultations, they've gone from 24 hours of clinic time a week to 6 hours of clinic time a week, and they've maintained the number of patients that they're seeing, and their QOF compliance, which is some measure of quality, has gone up by 18%. So they're spending a quarter of the time managing diabetes, and their results are getting better for patients. So there's something going on here which is quite powerful. So when you look at the slides when we send them out, because we're going to move on from a time point of view, just notice all of the benefits that group consultations creates, not only for the patients but also for the staff as well, because it also is a very energising way to practice that actually reduces loads of repetition. Those of you who are clinicians in the room, I'm sure that you have sat in clinics and it's sort of after about the 4th or 5th patient you thought, I've actually just said basically the same thing to all 4 patients that I've just seen. You know, that is not a very nice way to spend your morning, is it? And actually, by the time you get to about the 3rd or the 4th patient, you know, as a human being, you can't be as kind of engaged as you were at the start because it's repetitious. So we get rid of all that repetition. It also reduces do not attend rates. So you've seen this in your practices probably, you know, so many patients did not attend. There seems to be something with groups, maybe it's about letting other people down, you know, that people come more frequently. They actually come to the group when it's a group consultation. So there's loads of benefits. It seems to be a real win-win for everybody, really. So I'm going to hand over now to Helen, who's going to share with you her experiences of making group consultations work in early years. Helen.
Hello, good afternoon. So my background is in Shore Start Children's Centres, so that's family support for families with children under 5, government-funded service, providing a variety of services to support families with young children. We work very closely with our health visiting team and nursery nurses and provided some services together, but we were doing a lot of things separate. So this is what we started working on for group consultations. So the development checks for 2-year-olds. So I am not going to labour the points in this presentation in the interest of time, but this will be part of what you get out, sent out to you. So a 2-year review is basically checking on a child's development. There's a questionnaire that gets sent out beforehand and checking for some key markers to check on the development of the child. And then there's an opportunity to discuss some of the things in the Healthy Child programme and follow on with any follow-on referrals afterwards if necessary. So the old way, health visitors did this on a one-to-one. So they had, much like you're doing at the moment in GP clinics, they would have one family in at a time with their 2-year-old. Usually in a clinical setting, quite isolated, time-consuming, minimal resources. We weren't involved at all as children's centres, and there was little or even no opportunity to discuss anything else that might support the family. So this is what health staff were saying, the health visiting staff were saying at the time that So they felt isolated, they didn't like the rooms that they were working in, and the repetition, that was what we heard a lot, that they were saying the same things to the same families, appointment after appointment. So these are our drivers for change, and I think you'll see some common threads here. Even though I'm from a different service to you, there are really a lot of common threads here. So sheer numbers, the birth rate was increasing, and the numbers of children needing these checks was going up. Health visitor caseloads were increasing. I'm sure you'll see the links there. Staff wellbeing and job satisfaction, that links with what's going on in primary care now as well. And we had our children's centres were being changed into family centres. There was a recommissioning, much like your move towards primary care networks. So there's a lot of common threads between what was going on for us 3 years ago and where you are now. So, setting the scene of what happened nearly 3 years ago for us, so we set up a working group that was a mixture of health staff and children's centre staff and Georgina's team. And we agreed to work on 2-year reviews in a couple of areas, in 3 areas in Hertfordshire. We had a planning day, we had training, and then we just went for it. Sometimes that's just what you've got to do. You're not kind of hang around, just say, right, let's do this, let's just get on with it. So we agreed the roles, so Georgina's already said about the 3 different roles involved in a group consultation. We agreed with our staff across the 2 services who was going to do what. And there was a lot of discussion about the role of the children's centre, because this was new work for us. So my concern as a manager of 3 children's centres was, what are we going to get out of this? What can we add to it? Because this is new work, and I was being asked to put staff in once a week to something that we weren't already involved in. So we had to find the extra opportunities that we could, what we could add to support these families who were coming in. So these are our core design features. So this is how we set it up. We got the information beforehand in the children's centre so that we could check what families were already registered, what they were already accessing, if they were a family we've been trying to get hold of to introduce them to the idea of getting funding for their child to go to preschool. We looked at every opportunity we could to see the family in a more holistic way, so that it wasn't just about the development check. And then the questionnaires which had been sent out beforehand were scored on the day by the health team. So a really key part of the group consultation is the circle time that takes place kind of in the middle of the consultation. And so the circle time was with the adults, but with the children playing as well. And you know, the benefit of doing this in early years was that children were much more relaxed in a non-clinical setting with toys that they could play with, and so the parents were able to talk to each other, and that was what we saw was actually we were almost taking a step back, because they were talking to each other and sharing their knowledge and information that they'd got, talking about the local preschools, really supporting each other and sharing lots of knowledge with each other. We did lots of evaluation as well as we went along. Every single week, the 2 teams sat down and evaluated, and we changed things along the way, because none of us get it right the first time. We worked from a kind of even better if. This worked, but what would be even better, and changed things along the way. So this was our shared ambition, and Georgina has already made reference to the fact we're going to look at that with you today to see what your shared ambition is for your service. And this was our agenda. So whatever group consultation you're looking at from a clinical point of view for your settings, this was our agenda, our kind of baseline, if you like, of what we were going to talk about and what we needed to cover. And then parents were asked what was on top for them, what did they want to talk about the most. So this is what the parents told us that they liked: seeing their children play with other children, having a range of toys to play with, and being able to make comparisons and share stories. And choosing what they wanted to talk about. And so this is some of the comments we got from the parents, that they felt that their children were themselves, that they were, you know, much better represented just in a non-clinical, relaxed atmosphere. They liked talking to each other, they liked hearing other stories from other parents. And so this was the impact of integrated working for us between the two teams. So staff from the health visiting team and from the children's centre team had a greater understanding and respect for each other's roles, and were able to see where they could kind of weave in and out of each other's roles to give the very best service for our clients. And it was the best use of collective resources, both in terms of time and actual resources. Families were able to understand more what other services were available, and it gave us a really solid foundation for the future of this new family centre service, which is now in place. And this is really key. This was one of the drivers, one of them. So the efficiency gains for the health team. I think this is amazing. 1,500 hours per year saved. 22% time efficiency. So balance, 22% time efficiency, and yet our clients were saying that this was even better, that they were getting a better service. And they're now piloting antenatal and one-year group reviews as well.
The other thing that's happened is that it's no longer health visitors who do these reviews, it's actually nursery nurses. But because the nursery nurses aren't working on their own, as they've come in to do this new work, which is more highly skilled, they've been able to support each other. So if they're looking at a child and trying to work out what's going on with this child, do we have concerns? Because there's two of them in the room, they can actually talk to each other if they don't feel confident about individually assessing the child. So it's actually allowed a different professional to take on this work.
And these are the benefits for us. So we met families who were not already registered, and often for us they would be, I hate the term hard to reach, but they were our families that we were really trying to encourage to access some services to support their families. But they were not coming, but they would come to what they saw as a medical appointment within the children's centre. Opportunity to discuss other services that we were offering. Discussion about preschool, because there's funding available in the early years for children to attend early years education. And we were able to update our records and, really key, work more closely with the health team. So this is how the rollout kind of followed from there. So the 2-year group consultations have now been implemented right across Hertfordshire. The teams who were involved in the beginning have acted as mentors and been really a key part of rolling it out across the county. All of the teams were trained by ELC, we've taken place some more training recently, haven't we?
Training.
Yeah. And the group consultations are now just accepted as good practice. You know, we've kind of gone from that, this is a new thing, and my child used to have a one-to-one, you know, why has it changed, to now, this is what happens and it's good. And we've now got quality assurance processes and train-the-trainer models in place as well.
Cool. So hopefully now you've got loads of questions, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to run a group consultation about group consultations. What I'd like to suggest that we do is we're going to use the front row to be our group who are going to answer questions. So particularly because I think we've got quite a lot of PPG reps, haven't we, on the front row right now. I don't know if some of the clinicians who are in the audience and practice managers might like to come down, because we've got 4 more spaces down here and join to ask some questions in this next session. Yeah? So if you're a clinician, you may be, or a practice manager, come on down to the front of the room, that dreaded place.
You drive him, please. Come on. Can't do it without the manager, she said.
Yeah, exactly. We need a practice manager, the most important person, making the change to group consultations. Okay, so how this works is that we kind of model the way that we set up a group consultation in primary care, but instead of asking questions as if you were a diabetic or whatever, you're going to ask questions about group consultations, okay? So, hi, I'm Georgina. I'm here today to run this group consultation for you. I'm your facilitator. At this point, Helen isn't in the room, okay? Normally. We're going to make her... She's invisible here, yeah? She's invisible. It's really useful to have her in the room today because she gets to hear your questions, though, so she can sort of think about the answers. So, we're over the next 35 minutes or so, which is today's length of time that we have. If we were in a proper group consultation, it would be about 90 minutes in total, okay? We're going to learn about group consultations and explore them and how they work. So before we get going, I'm just going to set us up so that we can work really well together as a group, okay? So I'm not going to go through this in a great deal of detail because we've already done it, but at this point I would introduce the group understandings, get everybody to agree to those. I would introduce the car park, and I would make sure that everybody knows how we're going to use the car park if we need to. And then I would introduce session flow, and I'll just go through this quickly with you so that you know how a group consultation flows. So we've got our welcome and setup. We would also ask everybody to introduce themselves, which we will do very, very briefly. And then we would have something called the results board. The results board is a large piece of paper. In the first instance, you probably use a flip chart until you kind of worked out whether or not it was working really well. And there would be all the patients' names down one side, but only their first names. And then along the top would be 5 or 6 biometrics, which are all other things which are key to managing that condition and things that the patient can actually influence, yeah? So if it was something like diabetes, it's going to be HbA1c, blood pressure, possibly BMI, weight, cholesterol, and then you might have also other little nudges on there, like have you had your flu jab yet, if it was that time of the year? Have you had your feet checked? Have you had your eyes checked? And what the people who are working with us to evaluate the impact of group consultations are finding is, as well as that results board being really important to help patients to compare themselves with other people, which motivates them and helps them to understand that they're actually not, maybe need to do some improvement around some of those things. Is it also, that's maybe one of the reasons why the QOF is doing so much better, because it highlights the fact that people are not getting some of the tests that they should be getting. So it has lots of different functions, but it's really powerful and people really find it useful to compare themselves. So we would have that on the wall, and then the patients would look at that, and that would stimulate their questions for the clinician. So, why is my blood pressure so much higher than everybody else's? What's going on with, all sorts of questions will come up. They are quite easy to predict at the start because, and it's often a bit of a shock to the doctors and nurses because often people don't actually understand basic things like what does HbA1c mean? And the doctors and nurses are like, I've been telling this person for 10 years what it means, but they still haven't heard it. And that's the point, isn't it? Communication is only somebody receiving a message, it's not actually us telling them. So all of that leads to a really interesting discussion for the patients. So they decide their questions for the clinician, and then they tell the facilitator what their questions are, which we're going to do in a second. And then those are all gathered in, and then there's a little break whilst we have a look at the questions and decide how we're going to deal with them. And then the clinical session lasts about that will be for 10 to 12 patients. So already you can see, if there's a doctor or a nurse seeing 10 to 12 patients in an hour, that's a lot quicker than it would be normally in a clinic. And then after that hour, the clinician leaves and the facilitator spends another 20 minutes or so doing some goal setting with the patients, helping them to think about what they want to work on to keep well and improve the management of their condition. And then it ends. And depending on whether or not that group of people need to be followed up, you might see them in 6 months' time in another group clinic, or it might just be a once-a-year thing, depending on their clinical needs. Okay, so that's how it flows. So, what we're going to do now is if you could all write down, all our lovely people in our group consultation, a question that you would like to ask Helen about how group consultations work, anything, yeah? Any questions that you have got that you would like to ask, if you could write them down. If other people in the room who are observing, in effect, if you want to write your questions down too, and if they don't get answered, we'll either put them on the car park and make sure they get answered afterwards. If there's time, we'll answer them today, okay? But you might find that somebody else asked your question anyway. Okay? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so just hang on to your questions for a moment. So, I'm going to start with Diane. She looks as though she's looking at me with resolve here. I've got a question. So what would you like to ask Diane?
I would like to know how you would set a meeting date, i.e. the timetable of those meetings.
Okay.
How you decide on the venue, and when in the daytime that will happen, as there are lots of different people with needs in terms of when they can actually get there.
Yeah.
And I am thinking in particular of the example Helen used about working mums and dads.
Brilliant, fantastic. So loads of really practical and carers. Yeah. So lots of practical questions about access, really, isn't it? So can I just bring everybody back together so that we're all listening as we're talking in line with our understandings that we agreed. So, did anyone else have anything about access and making it fit for different groups? Jo?
Well, that was my question, actually. What happens if you can't make a time or date at a set because maybe you're a carer, maybe you've got 5 other things on with you, you've got another consultant's appointment, always,
Yeah.
or another group consultation with somewhere else.
Yeah.
So how do you fit that in?
Brilliant. So how do we make sure that we actually schedule group consultations so everybody can find an
Well, it's
opportunity?
the other way around. How can you find a group consultation that can fit in with your life?
Yeah, okay.
It's the other way around, which
Yeah.
is different.
So let's put that up, just hang a minute. So group consultations to fit in with my life, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Just hang on a second. I know you've got some other questions in there, but we'll make sure we cover those as well. Kenneth.
Where do consultations take place? A, for adults, B, for children and parents, and how often do they take place for children and parents?
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So we've got how often and where, basically, and is that different for parents and for children? Yeah? So, how often? And when you say how often, do you mean by that how often for the person? Do you mean like, so for instance, if you're someone who's living with diabetes, how often would you have?
That will be dependent on, how can I put it, that's 6 months yearly.
Yeah.
But as far as parents and children are concerned, there are special cases. A new mother experimenting right the way through from early birth. She's had no experience and she needs support constantly.
Yeah.
So she needs far more
Okay.
frequent.
We'll share with you some stories around that. Fantastic, Colin.
Okay, right. My GP has told me about this group consultation. As a patient with a long-term condition, I'm aware that I will have also long-term needs.
Yeah.
How can I have access to that person that's already established in the community navigator, who can signpost towards me?
Yeah. So how do we? Is it sort of how can we involve and how can we make sure we link in with the community navigators and that kind of thing? Fantastic. Which is a really important question. Okay, so community navigator link. And it's interesting to note from what Helen was talking about that in some ways children's centres play the role of community navigators in early years. So notice that in Helen's model, this was a joint model which was delivered by children's centres and the clinical service. So there might be a clue in there for how we might move forward. Joe, did you have a second question or
I'll write it down.
Okay, no problem. Brenda, this is exactly how group consultations work, by the way, just to let you
It
know.
was just what struck me when Anne was talking about the children playing and thing. What happens when you've got other children? Is there a limit how many you're going to have?
Yeah.
Health and safety.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's something about how many and how many people are in the room, and is that different if it's children versus adults?
Yeah.
You may not be surprised to know
Yeah, and
that
the
it
same
is.
thing is, somebody say you've got arthritis, they're young, do you then bring children in on those sessions as well?
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Jack,
I've got a couple of questions, one of which has already been covered.
brilliant. Give it to me anyway. Which one was that?
But the other one, to my mind, there's a really quite a major difference between mitigating poor or bad outcomes and improving people's health in the NHS. And what just been described to us as maximising good outcomes, as in childcare. Could we not have an example of successes